Pokemon Legends Arceus, there have been found multiple files of whole models and 3D environments that look like, well, a modern bedroom. This was probably meant to be a place where you started your journey in Pokemon Legends Arceus, as you were then there from your room transported into the Hisui region. However, this location ended up not actually being used at any point throughout the games. We never got to see it, and even when you finish the game, you never really get returned back to your own present time, because clearly we were sent from the future. So this is simply just a piece of cut content that we'll never see actually in the games. So the Altering Cave is a place that I've talked about multiple times, but the interesting thing about it is that it was meant to be a location where you were supposed to get your hands on Johto Pokemon in Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. There's also a version of the cave that exists in Emerald, but nonetheless, in Fire Red Leaf Green, it existed, but there was nothing more than Zubats inside of it. Originally, there was supposed to be just a bunch of Johto Pokemon as a way for you to obtain Johto Pokemon within the Kanto region itself, but unfortunately, it never actually got used, and the feature, as well as the whole cave, is just there left in the game and actually accessible, but there's just nothing there. The content that's supposed to be in it has been cut away. Pokemon Black and White, there is a lost cut event for the Lock Capsule. It was meant to be given through a Nintendo event or through the Relocator. Now, this item, while currently unreleased even till this day, can be received actually through the Relocator from Heart Gold and Soul Silver or certain events. But again, pretty much this event never happened. And now, once you receive the actual Lock Capsule, you're supposed to take it to Mr. Lock in the northern road of Castelia City. As you do talk to him, he'll tell you that the item in the Lock Capsule was locked in there to protect it from Team Rocket. He kindly then opens it for you, and it contains TM95. However, the actual item was never distributed officially at any given time, making it impossible to actually do the first step of the whole event. Now, there is ways to get around it, but officially, technically not. And there is, of course, the Azure Flute event to battle Arceus. Now, of course, you may have seen this event in the past, but there was actually no legitimate way to do it, as it was never distributed by Game Freak or Nintendo, and there's actually a reason for this. Even the developer, Junichi Masuda, he actually said that the reason they decided to, well, cancel the event and just not do it was that perhaps it would be a bit confusing of you getting the Azure Flute and that leading you to Arceus with the whole, like, Hall of Origin and all that sort of stuff, that it just seemed like it might have been a bit too complicated and or confusing, hence they decided to cancel the event and just instead in the future, alongside one of the Pokemon movies, distribute a free Arceus to the fans. In Pokemon Black 2 and White 2, there is actually an unused weather effect that never makes an appearance. So every time thunderous or tornadoes appear, a rainstorm is supposed to start, and it's supposed to get pretty intense. Since these Pokemon actually can't be found in Black and White 2, these two weather effects just go unused. They're just in the files, but they never actually get utilized because these Pokemon never actually appear within the games. Like, you can never really capture them. Of course, there are ways to, get them into the game one way or another, but technically, since you can't officially get them, the effect is never actually really used, so it just exists within the files. There was a prototype version of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, which actually leaked several years back now. Now, in this prototype version, a lot of stuff was actually found, such as the fact that Trainer Red was supposed to make an earlier appearance in the game than what was actually ended up happening. Now, Red was likely planned to make an appearance far earlier into the game outside of the post-game Master Trainer quest, right? He was actually supposed to appear alongside Blue in Blue's debut, or the moment that Blue first makes his appearance in Pewter City, as the dialogue here actually has a scene that references Red as if he was standing right next to Blue. He also gives you instead like 5 rare candies as opposed to the 5 Great Balls like he does in the final version of the actual game when you play it normally. There was supposed to be a gym in Jubilee City in Pokemon Platinum, as it was actually found in the files. Now, this place, however, doesn't actually feature a cool gym design or anything. It's just a regular inside of a normal Pokemon house from Pokemon Platinum. But this was an unused map because at some point they thought about possibly putting a gym within Jubilee City. In Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, you actually have a mystery gift hidden event for 2 Pokemon, which is, oddly enough, haven't actually happened yet. Now, this is the 2 Pokemon that you have. One of them is a Quagsire, right? It's the first one you've got, which actually isn't used. It's just within the files, but it was never actually utilized. It's supposed to be a level 91. And the other one is a level 80 Yanma. Now, the thing is, Yanma isn't even in the game, okay? At this point in time, when I'm recording this, Yanma isn't in the game yet. Now, we do actually seemingly have confirmation from the DLC that Yanma will be making an appearance in the new DLC and will be included in the game because of that. So maybe this level 80 unused gift Pokemon is supposed to be that Yanma. It's supposed to be released with the DLC alongside the level 90 Quagsire, potentially. But it's just odd that it's in the files but hasn't been utilized and is for a Pokemon that wasn't even in the game because clearly they cut it out to keep it for the DLC. Another missing thing in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are ways to obtain the legendaries as shiny variants. Now, they exist in the files, but as of today, you actually can't find any sort of way to get your hands on them. There's no legitimate way to get your hands on the shinies within the game. They might be distributed through, through an event in the future, but for the most part, this is one of the few, well, I guess one of many games in Pokemon that just have legendary Pokemon where the shinies exist within the files but are never officially obtainable unless you are cheating in the game. There was supposed to be a roaming Darkrai, just like roaming Cresselia in the 4th generation Pokemon games. Now, there exists a flag within the game that actually within the files or within the actual code of the game that simply needs to be switched on in the game's code, and all of a sudden you'll have a roaming Darkrai in the wild, which you should be able to capture. It is really weird because this exists clearly for a reason, as they probably planned to have a Darkrai event where it's going to roam around the map just randomly, the same way that, in the future we had the member card and everything. You can find him on his island and you can capture him there. Well, technically Cresselia works in a similar way, but Cresselia roams the actual Sinnoh region, but Darkrai doesn't. So maybe this was a planned event, and maybe there was supposed to be an event at some point down the line, official Nintendo event, where you go to a game store and gain a code which would actually just, trigger this switch and turn it on within the game's files, and all of a sudden you'd have a roaming Darkrai, but this never happened. There existed a sprite and battle code for a battle against a trainer called the Chief. Now, when diving deeper into what it is, you can discover that apparently the Chief sprite exists and a whole trainer class was meant to be there for a battle against seemingly the president of the Silphco Corporation, or the Silph Corporation, I guess. There was supposed to be actually their president in a battle. He would be found in the Safari Zone, which would have been quite a strange event to take place in the actual games. In Pokemon Gold and Silver's prototype versions, it was actually discovered that there was supposed to be a whole town at the Lake of Rage with buildings and everything. And if you look at this early version of the Lake of Rage, it's actually, interestingly, not just a little lake with not really much going on. It was originally supposed to be a city in and of itself, which, kind of makes sense with the general game and how it works and how Gold and Silver actually turned out in the end. Now, this city or this town was supposed to actually have a gym, which also isn't weird because even places like Cyanwood City were really only added later in development. So maybe the actual gym we see, within Cyanwood City would have been at the Lake of Rage instead, which is interesting. Also, this unused version of the map was called Biwako, which is basically a reference to Lake Biwa, which is, within the source code here, and it's just a direct reference to what the Lake of Rage is based on. Now, this one is really cool, but there was a beta version of Trainer Red's model, or a version of a model that looks kind of like Trainer Red within the files of Pokemon Sun and Moon. And even in the promo leading up to the actual Sun and Moon games, there was a kind of, I guess, reveal event to show off the new game Sun and Moon, and there was this piece of artwork that showed what seemed to be Lily and Trainer Red interacting in front of, what looked to, at the time, to be some sort of hotel, and they were talking to each other. However, whether this was supposed to be an early model of, you guessed, the Pokemon player, like the guy you play as, the player character, or a early version of Trainer Red, we don't really know. But we do know, though, that Red does show up in Pokemon Sun and Moon, and this model was seemingly never really used. It just exists within the files, but it was never utilized, which is kind of odd. There was a weird female Latican trainer. Now, Latican in itself, what is that? Well, basically, it's this weird fusion between, I guess, Blaziken and Latios. It's this weird combination of the two into one. Now, this was a early concept art for Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire that never actually ended up happening. Now, I am very curious to see what this would have been like, having the two of them fused together, because we already talked about earlier in this video about the idea of somehow fusing moves together. Is it possible that there was maybe an idea of fusing Pokemon together as well? In this case, the starter Pokemon with a Latias or Latios, or something along those lines. Again, there's not really much known. The character in this image is unnamed, and not really much is known in general about this whole concept art. Now, this one is a pretty interesting one, but for the strategy guide for Pokemon Red and Green in Japan, there existed a artwork that showed 3 characters, well, with the 3 Kanto starters. You had what seemed to be Red, you had Blue, but then also a female character that didn't exist within the games. I mean, Red and Blue were both in Pokemon Red and Green version, however, the female character didn't exist. Well, this artwork was actually made just so they could feature Squirtle in it as well, and this was made for a magazine. Specifically, they were supposed to be adding in a female character, but they weren't actually having one in the games themselves. So Green just became kind of a folklore character that people knew about and was later on also used in the Pokemon manga, and through that became a staple, and then later of course included in Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green during the remakes, and of course also inspired people like Chris, or characters such as Chris in of course Pokemon Crystal in this case, and later on was also added as a character herself. So yes, Leaf or Green, whatever you want to call her, was eventually added in, but originally wasn't really supposed to be in there. It was just an unnamed female character and was just kind of there, and of course did make an appearance in the Adventures manga. There used to be a bi-monthly game review, I guess, magazine, which was published during April of 1997 by Microdesign Publishing. In here, they actually had an interview with Ken Sugimori, the man behind a lot of the designs of different Pokemon, and he decided to draw some, I guess, Pokemon-inspired designs. However, what was interesting is that one of these ended up, I guess more than one, I guess 2 of them ended up being real. The first one has got to be the unnamed creature, which was a Clefairy and Hitmontop fusion, kind of what it looked like, which was a bit weird. There was also an unnamed turtle, which kind of resembles Tortuga, which I guess ended up happening way later. And then there was also a design that looked like a Tyranitar. It was like an early version of Tyranitar, which was more brownish in color, which is very strange because it has a few differences from the final design. Like the actual final design of Tyranitar is a bit different from this early version, which wasn't even confirmed yet. It wasn't even a known fact that it was going to be in here, but it ended up being in this version though. He actually drew it and kind of already gave a hint for a Pokemon that was going to be in Gold and Silver. So it is very strange that it was first introduced, or likely this design from specifically this magazine was revisited or reintroduced, and they decided, okay, hey, well, you know, let's use this design from the actual magazine that you drew because it was very good, and let's use it in the actual games because people seem to like it, but let's rework it a little bit, which is what they ended up doing. There's also 2 characters within this magazine, 2 characters specifically, and it was a female and male character. Now, the female character looked kind of like a, I guess, cool trainer, a lass, a beauty, whatever you want to call them, with a Cascade badge on her shoulder on the shirt, which was a bit odd. Then there was also a male character, or male trainer, that looked a little bit like a ghost type or psychic type, I guess, gym leader or trainer. He kind of reminded people of a tamer, a psychic, a juggler, whatever you want to call the different trainer classes, and seemed to also have a gym badge that looked like a red diamond on his bandana. The thing though is, well, were these supposed to be, I guess, hints to what was supposed to come, or did he draw these, I guess, all these things, including the Pokemon and the trainers, did he perhaps draw them and then they realized, wait a minute, these are actually pretty good, let's not waste them for just a magazine, let's reuse these because they could be really useful, and that's more or less what ended up happening.